The 7th of August, 1985. Just before 3:30 in the morning, a telephone rings at a police station in Chelmsford, in Essex. It is not the emergency line, it is a direct line, and the man calling is calm enough to give his name and his address before he says anything else. He tells them his father has just rung him, sounding frightened. He says his father's words were, "Please come over, your sister has gone crazy, she's got the gun." And then, he says, the line went dead. His name is Jeremy Bamber. He is 24 years old. The house he is calling about is his parents' farm. 4 hours later, armed officers break down the back door of that farmhouse. Inside they find 5 people. All 5 are dead. 25 shots have been fired inside the house. And the door the officers have just broken through was locked from the inside. By that afternoon, the police think they know what happened there. 41 years later, this country still cannot agree on whether they were right. So let me take you back a few days and introduce you to the people who died in that house. White House Farm sits outside a village called Unopened Darcy, in flat, open countryside between Maldon and the Essex coast. Neville Bamber farmed it. He was 61 years old and 6'4", a big man, in good health. He was also a magistrate, which means he sat in local courts and heard cases. He was the sort of man a village trusts with things. He kept rifles at the house. One of them matters more than anything else in this story. A .22 rifle he had bought the previous November. It came with a telescopic sight and a silencer. People who knew him said he was careful with his guns. He cleaned them after using them. He didn't leave them lying around. His wife June was also 61. Religion had always been important to her, and in her final years it had come to take up almost all of her thinking. Neville and June had married in 1949. They couldn't have children of their own, so they adopted 2. Sheila first. Then Jeremy. Sheila was 28. She had worked as a model in London, married a man called Caffell, and had twin boys Daniel and Nicholas. They were 6 years old. But her marriage had ended in 1982, and around the same time her mental health began to break down. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She was admitted to hospital twice, the second time only 5 months before the killings. She was on monthly injections to keep her stable. Her sons lived with their father. And Jeremy, the youngest, was 24. He lived 3.5 miles away in a house his parents had bought for him, and he worked on his father's farm. That, then, is the family. 2 parents in their 60s, a daughter who was seriously unwell, 2 small boys, and a son living just down the road. Now, the last few days. On Sunday, the 4th of August, Caffell drove Sheila and the twins to the farm to stay with their grandparents. On Tuesday the 6th, at 9:30 in the evening, the farm secretary rang the house. She spoke to Neville, and she came away thinking she had interrupted an argument. Jeremy had eaten supper at the farmhouse that evening. He left before 10 o'clock. He would say later that something difficult was discussed at that dinner table. The twins. Whether Sheila was well enough to keep them or whether they should be fostered out. He also said that as he was leaving, he saw rabbits in the yard. So he took his father's rifle from the office and loaded it. Then he changed his mind, left the loaded gun in the kitchen, and drove home. Remember that, because it becomes important. By his own account, he left a loaded rifle sitting in that kitchen on that particular night. 5.5 hours later, he makes the phone call. Police were on the road within minutes. Driving over from Witham, they actually passed Jeremy on the way. He was heading to the farm too, but driving noticeably slower than they were. He arrived at his family's house a minute or 2 after the police did. And then, nothing happened. There was no sound from inside the house. No shouting, no shots. Just a dog barking somewhere in the dark. The officers were worried they might be walking into a hostage situation, so they made a decision. They waited. They waited for 4 hours. Armed officers arrived at about 5 in the morning. At 7:30, they finally went in. And this is the part everyone remembers. For those 4 hours, Jeremy Bamber stood outside that house, in front of police officers. Hold on to that. It comes back later. Inside, the kitchen looked like a fight had happened in it. Neville was slumped forward over an overturned chair by the fireplace. Other chairs and stools were knocked over. There was broken crockery on the floor, and spilled sugar, and blood. A lampshade had been smashed. Nearby, a telephone lay with the receiver off the hook. Whatever happened to Neville Bamber, it was not quick, and he did not go quietly. Upstairs, June was on the floor by the bedroom door. Daniel and Nicholas were in their beds in another room, and Sheila was lying near her parents' bed. The rifle was resting across her chest. Her right hand was on top of it, the wounds were in her neck, and pressed against her arm was her mother's Bible. The silencer and the sight had been taken off the rifle. Now, look at that scene the way the senior officers looked at it that morning. A seriously ill young woman. An argument about her children the night before. A gun in her hands. A Bible beside her. They reached their conclusion within hours. Sheila had shot her family and then killed herself. And here is why that matters so much. Once you decide a case is closed, you stop investigating it. They photographed the rooms, they collected bullets and cartridge cases. Firearms officers opened the gun cupboard downstairs just to make the other weapons safe, then shut it again. Nobody searched that cupboard properly. Why would they? They already knew what had happened. 3 days later, other members of the family went to the farm cousins and relatives who had never believed a word of the official story. One of them, David Boutflour, opened that same gun cupboard and reached into the back of it, and his hand closed around the silencer. 4 people were standing there watching him lift it out. They took it home and looked at it under a lamp that evening. There appeared to be blood on it, and there was a fleck of red paint, the same red as the paint on a kitchen shelf in the room where Neville had died fighting. They called the police. A detective came to collect it and noticed something else. A single gray hair, about an inch long, stuck to the metal. By the time that silencer arrived at the laboratory, the hair was gone. It was never tested. It has never been explained. But the blood was still there. Deep inside the silencer, enough blood had run in and dried to be tested with the methods available in 1985. And the result was this. The blood could have come from Sheila, and could not have come from any of the other 4. Now stay with me, because the next part is the entire case. For Sheila's blood to end up inside that silencer, the silencer had to be attached to the rifle when she was shot. So the laboratory did something very simple. They screwed the silencer onto the rifle and measured how long the weapon was. Then they measured Sheila her height and the length of her arms, and they found that with the silencer attached, she could not reach the trigger. Her arms were too short. So think about what that means. If the silencer was on the gun, Sheila could not have shot herself. But if the silencer was off the gun, then her blood should not have been inside it. Both things cannot be true. And that is what turned this from a family tragedy into a murder investigation. Because if Sheila didn't fire that rifle, then somebody else did. Somebody who then placed the gun on her chest, put her mother's Bible beside her arm, walked downstairs, and hid the silencer at the back of a cupboard, not realizing that silencers catch blood. A month after the killings, Jeremy's girlfriend walked into a police station and changed her story. Her name was Julie Mugford. The day after the murders, she had given a statement that said nothing against him at all. Now she said she had left things out. She told them Jeremy had talked for months about killing his family. That he had described how he would get in through a window, that he had said his sister would make a good scapegoat, and that on the night of the 6th, he told her it was going to be tonight or never. His answer was simple. She was lying, and she was lying because he had ended their relationship. He was arrested, released on bail, and flew to the south of France. When he came back, he was arrested again and charged with 5 murders. The trial lasted 19 days, and by the end it came down to 3 questions. Did the jury believe Julie Mugford? Were they sure Sheila hadn't done it? And had that 3 o'clock phone call from his father ever really happened? On the 28th of October 1986, 10 of the 12 jurors said guilty. He was told he would spend the rest of his life in prison. And from that day until this one, he has said the same thing. He did not do it. Now, most people assume that's where the story stops. A man in a cell, protesting, running out of road. It isn't. Because over the next 40 years, this case kept moving, and more than once, it moved in his direction. Start with 1996. His lawyers were still actively fighting the case when Essex police destroyed many of the original exhibits from the trial. The physical objects. The things you would need if you ever wanted to test anything again. Nobody told him. Nobody told his lawyers. They found out long afterwards. Then comes 2001, and the moment that made this case famous. DNA testing had been invented since the trial, so they ran it on the blood inside that silencer, the single most important object in the whole case. And the answer came back the opposite way round. The blood was not Sheila's. It could have come from one of the other victims. Understand what that does. The reason everyone believed Sheila couldn't have shot herself was that her blood was inside the silencer. Take that away, and the whole chain of reasoning falls apart. The body that reviews possible wrongful convictions looked at this and said something striking. If the silencer evidence couldn't carry the weight the trial had put on it, the rest of the case wouldn't be enough to keep the conviction standing. So it went back to the Court of Appeal in 2002, on 16 separate grounds. And in open court, in front of the press, his lawyers accused 3 named police officers of fabricating evidence against him. That is about as serious as an allegation gets. So the court did something unusual. It called those officers in and put them on the stand to be questioned. And then Jeremy's own lawyers stopped asking. They dropped the accusation partway through the hearing that was supposed to prove it. The judges concluded the paperwork problems were the work of an officer rushing, not a conspiracy. The appeal was dismissed. He tried again in 2004. That review took 7 years and ended in refusal. A challenge to that refusal was also refused. And then, in 2024, something completely new. A journalist called Heidi Blake published an investigation in The New Yorker. In it, a former Essex police officer named Nicholas Milbank said that on the night of the murders, a 999 call had come from inside the farmhouse and that he had heard sounds on the open line. Now remember where Jeremy was for those 4 hours. Standing outside, in front of police officers. If anyone inside that house picked up a telephone during that time, he cannot be the killer. It is that simple, and it is that enormous. So did it happen? The magazine refused to hand over its recording of the interview. Essex police said Milbank had signed a statement in September 2024 denying that he had ever spoken to the New Yorker at all. And shortly after signing it, Nicholas Milbank died. The one man who could have settled it is gone. Which brings us to now. In 2021, Jeremy's solicitor submitted a new application with 10 separate grounds, including that phone call. The answer came back in the summer of 2025, 4 years later. Refused. But look closely at that refusal, because this is the part almost nobody noticed. They didn't examine 10 grounds. They examined 4. The other 6, they said, would be looked at later. No date was given. None has been given since. Essex police have never shifted their position. This conviction has been examined again and again, and nothing has ever suggested the wrong man is in prison. Jeremy's supporters argue that the people reviewing the police went to the police to check claims made about the police. And this month, Emily Bolton, the lawyer who freed Andrew Malkinson, said publicly that she is certain this conviction is unsafe. So where does that leave us? There are still only 2 versions of that night. Either a 24-year-old man shot his mother, his father, his sister, and 2 6-year-old boys, and then stood outside the house for 4 hours pretending to be terrified. Or a desperately ill woman did something unthinkable, and her brother has spent 41 years in prison for it. 10 jurors were sure. 3 sets of judges have looked at it since and left the conviction standing. But the evidence has been destroyed. The hair vanished. The blood said one thing, then it said another, and the only man who claimed there was a call from inside that house denied it and then died. And tonight, 6 sealed arguments about 5 murders are sitting in a file somewhere, unopened. That last part isn't a mystery about 1985. It's a decision somebody is choosing not to make. Tell me in the comments which version you believe. And when those 6 files are finally opened, this is where you'll hear what was inside them.